quite sure where we were on that. Thanks everybody for coming this morning. I am joined with our Director of the State Office of Budget and Management, Kristin Walker, as well as members of our team. Thank you for your great work on this budget. As I've said before, once-in-a-generation opportunities require once-in-a-generation investments. This budget we're presenting today meets the moment. It invests in a fast-growing state so people can get the record number of better-paying jobs that are being created every day. It recognizes that historic investments in education and child care are needed now to make sure we have the well-trained workforce for the jobs of today and tomorrow. It invests in our schools, our health, our safety, our transportation, our water, our state employee workforce, and our families. The major focus of my budget is strengthening education with historic investments from cradle to career. We can and should make good on the constitutional guarantee of a sound basic education to create opportunity for everybody. My budget proposes $1.5 billion more for early childhood education and child care to benefit our youngest children who need to learn, their parents who need to work, and our businesses which need to hire them. It recognizes that with 5,000 teacher vacancies across our state, we must provide educators with the pay and the respect that they so richly deserve. That's why we're proposing raising teacher and principal pay by an average of 18% over the next 2 years. That would take us from 32nd in the nation to 16th in teacher pay, while making us first in the Southeast. We're also restoring master's pay and significantly expanding the reach of Teaching Fellows scholarships to attract more teachers into the profession. Other important school personnel like bus drivers and counselors would get a 9.5% raise over the next 2 years, while all school employees would get a retention bonus of either $1,000 or $1,500. If you make less than $75,000, you would get $1,500, and if you make more than $75,000, you would get $1,000. We know it's not just pay that makes teaching a challenge, but also the shortage of help. Sometimes it's as simple as actually getting children to school on time. And my budget will get more qualified, licensed school bus drivers behind the wheel. It supports student mental health by hiring 1,000 more nurses, counselors, and social workers, and providing access to school psychologists. And it invests $1 billion in school construction and renovation to make sure that children are learning in 21st century classrooms. To help our teachers educate the leaders of tomorrow, we must address the challenges of today. And we all know that the heart of North Carolina's economic success is our workers. We recruited a record number of new jobs in 2022, and the people who will fill them need the training and the skills. My budget invests in on-the-job training, credentialing, internships, pre-apprenticeships to help people move directly into good-paying jobs. It supports our community colleges with higher pay and bonuses for instructors and scholarships to help keep their tuition affordable for North Carolinians. Our state employees are the engine that powers essential services for our state, and I am so thankful for their work. Agency leaders will tell you that it's been difficult to recruit and retain employees in many state government positions like nurses and correctional officers and engineers. I'm proposing an 8% across-the-board pay increase for state employees over the next 2 years, with retention bonuses of either $1,000 or $1,500 depending on salary. There are additional state employee pay increases for those in STEP plans, along with funds that agencies can use to increase pay and bonuses even more for hard-to-fill jobs. Not only is our workforce important, but getting our infrastructure updated to meet the needs of a growing economy is critical. We've already won major infrastructure funding from the federal government, and this budget sets aside required match money as we aggressively continue to compete for more clean water, economic development, electric grid improvement, transportation, and high-speed internet infrastructure. Our amazing success in recruiting major manufacturers has left us with too few megasites to market. This budget includes investments to make megasite development, to make it easier for companies to plant a flag in North Carolina, and in turn provide spin-off work for small businesses. As we recruit the larger companies, we know that our small businesses are the backbone of our economy in every community. So this budget invests funds supporting them. I'm also proposing major investments in our innovation and clean energy economies to support the good-paying jobs of the future and today. While we expand our economy, we need to keep protecting our air and our water and our land to ensure healthy communities and the natural beauty of our state. Investments in land and water preservation as well as flood resiliency will protect our health, our environment, and our communities. And thriving communities need to be safe from crime. And this budget aims to reduce crime and make our state safer through better pay and bonuses for law enforcement, school safety grants, investments in reentry programs, violence intervention, a fentanyl prosecution team, and body cameras for local law enforcement agencies. To combat cybersecurity threats affecting local governments and schools and our state agencies, my budget recommends funds to protect our systems that contain vital information, including over 40 positions to bolster the state's cybersecurity and privacy capabilities. The safety of our communities goes hand in hand with the health of our people, and we can address both by tackling the mental health crisis and opioid misuse. The recent agreement to expand Medicaid and the billions in funds that'll come will allow us to improve the health of North Carolinians for generations to come. My budget proposes using a portion of the $1.7 billion Medicaid expansion signing bonus to create IHOPE Fund, which stands for Improving Health Outcomes for People Everywhere. There is a mental health crisis in our country, but we can make progress here in North Carolina with the right investments. The IHOPE Fund designates $1 billion for mental health and substance abuse, with funding for inpatient and community care, facilities and support for those in mental health crisis, integrating mental health and primary care practices and schools, and to address mental health in the justice system. We all have friends and colleagues and family members who are navigating mental health and substance abuse challenges, and we know they need our support. We've got to erase the stigma of these challenges, but we just can't stop there. Investing in crisis care, the right nurses, facilities, medication, therapy will save lives, save money, and get people well. There are funds in this budget for aging in place, as well as housing for seniors, working families, veterans, and people with disabilities. This budget is comprehensive and well planned. This is a historic moment for our state. We have an unprecedented amount of funding to invest for the next 2 years from state and federal funds. Yet, the revenue projections for the following years level off dramatically showing there will likely be insufficient funds to meet the needs of our rapidly growing state. We must continue to meet those needs, balance the budget, and make sure we have significant reserves to handle an economic downturn. This budget does all that. It also builds in tax fairness. We want to give the income tax breaks to working families, the people who need them, not the wealthy and not the corporations. I recommend a personal income tax cut for families making less than $200,000 a year for the next 4 years to get them down to 3.99% by 2027. Taxpayers earning more than $200,000 would stay at the recently reduced tax rate of 4.75%. On the corporate side, our tax rate is already competitive as businesses are coming here in droves. More corporate tax breaks mostly help out the large, out-of-state, or multinational corporations and not our homegrown businesses. My budget leaves our corporate income tax rate at 2.5%, the lowest in the country among the 44 states that have a corporate tax. Giving even more tax breaks to big corporations and the wealthiest earners will stunt our growth, starve our schools, and keep our state from reaching its full potential. It is that unlimited potential that makes North Carolina first in opportunity, and that's the name of this budget. But we didn't get here by accident. It took a forward-looking vision and focused investments for us to succeed. With these historic investments now in our communities, in our people, and in our future, we can ensure that every North Carolinian has access to the exceptional opportunity to thrive. As tradition, I'm going to take a few questions here for you. Then Kristin Walker, our Chief Budget Officer, will come forth and explain this budget in a little more detail, but I'll take questions. Yes, Colin.
The spending number that the legislature came out with was at a certain level a couple weeks ago. How does this budget compare, and do you think they're setting the limit on spending too low to fund the state's needs?
Well, we need to make historic investments right now. So this budget is definitely more than the limit that they have set.
You know how much more roughly?
Yes, there's an 18% increase in the first year and a 3.9% increase for the second year. Yes.
Have you spoken with Speaker Moore or Senator Berger about your budget and theirs and where there are similarities and differences yet?
So first, they don't have a budget yet. And secondly, we've talked about a lot of the issues that are involved in this budget, particularly Medicaid expansion and what we would do with that funding. But this would be the first time that they've seen this comprehensive budget that we're presenting. Yes, sir.
What's the justification of having 18% raises over 2 years for teachers, but only 8% for state employees? I mean, 8% over 2 years still doesn't keep them up with the pace of inflation.
So there will be additional funding for many state employees. We provided 3% for each state agency to use to increase salaries over and above that across the board, particularly for the hard-to-fill jobs, and they can provide funding for up to 50% of the employees who are there. In addition, we've given retention bonuses to these state employees, and other state employees who are in STEP plans on top of what we've talked about would be an additional 1.5% increase in their pay over and above the amounts that we've just mentioned. But look, in our education system, historically, it's been underfunded. It's one of the reasons why we have 5,000 teacher vacancies. Ours is one of the greatest in the nation. We have to invest to make sure that our education funding is up to par. Yes.
Going off of what Gary was saying, that I have that right, it's 9.5%. You mentioned bus drivers and counselors. I assume that's all the non-certified.
That's right. Yep.
Why not give them the 18% for those vacancy rates are also an issue?
Well, where our problems lie right now is make sure we have enough quality teachers in the classroom. I think we've all come to the conclusion, we all have disagreements about what we need to do for education, but the thing we all seem to agree on, that public education will improve significantly in North Carolina if we have a good teacher in every classroom and a good principal in every school. And that's what this budget aims at. And also, I think we know the support staff is going to be important. So this provides more funding to try to make sure we get more bus drivers and counselors and nurses and all that support staff that teachers need. Michael.
Regarding the tax proposal, as far as the people making under 200,000, that would go to 3.99 no matter what, based on the budget from a couple of years ago. Did you consider going any lower than 3.99 for people under 200,000?
I think it's important that we concentrate our tax cuts for the working families. And we also want to maintain the funding that we need to make the education, the investments in education that we need as well.
That's all the time we got.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate
I
it.
have a question on Western North Carolina and Canton. I had a question on Western North Carolina and Canton. Sorry.
I'm deeply concerned about the people in Canton. You will see a fund in this budget for people in Canton. We put an initial $5 million in there, but we've also structured it so that it can accept federal funds, private funds, additional funds that the legislature might put in place. And we are talking with the people there and working in a coordinated effort. I talked to the Congressman Edwards the other day. I've spoken with the mayor in Canton. We understand that this is a big blow to the people in Western North Carolina across the board, and we got to work to fix it. Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Kristin Walker. I'm the State Budget Director. Also want to be sure to thank the Governor and his team, as well as my staff in the Office of State Budget and Management. We started working on this budget more than 6 months ago. And as the Governor mentioned, it's a comprehensive plan that takes a look at all of the issues facing our state. Today, I want to give you an overview of where we are today, about this historic moment in time that the Governor spoke of. I want to tell you about the guiding principles that were used to develop this budget, which leads to the priority investments that we've made in this budget. As the Governor said, we are at a moment in time right now of historic opportunity. We have a budget surplus that you all have heard of. There's a great potential right now with federal funds. The federal government has been investing heavily in states. There's also population growth and record job creation. Last year was a record number of jobs created in North Carolina. And with that comes a need to respond to these pressing issues facing our state and to spark opportunities for all North Carolinians. To set the stage for you with that population growth, we had the third largest population gain in the nation last year, 133,000 new North Carolinians. Almost all of those are people who moved here because they see this as a place of opportunity, because they hear about our job growth, because they want to move here and live here. And by 2025, just 2 years from now, we anticipate that we will have more than 11 million people here. As you know, we've gained almost 100,000 people each year over the last decade. The demographics of that population are changing. By 2029, 1 in 5 North Carolinians will be older than 65. And not long after that, the population over 65 will exceed our population under 18. Our economy. We have the 11th largest economy in the nation. As you've heard, we have unemployment at historically low levels. We have a very tight labor market facing our employers, and we know we have folks who have not returned to the labor force. We know that labor force participation is still down. Wage growth has kept up and outpaced inflation, not for state government workers, as we've talked about, but in other private sector areas. However, we know that right now economic growth is likely to slow, and you see that reflected in the consensus forecast that came out last month. So that has been accounted for in this budget. So what were those guiding principles that the governor and team used to develop this budget? The first was first and foremost to maintain a fiscally sound budget. As you heard the governor say, this budget does not raise taxes. It is a balanced budget, and it keeps almost $7 billion in reserves. We also wanted to create opportunities for all North Carolinians, both education, workforce, and economic development. We want to build healthy, resilient communities, and we want to ensure that services are available for North Carolinians who are here today and those who are coming here in the future. You heard the governor speak of revenue. So what we have here is the consensus revenue forecast. So this was agreed upon by nonpartisan staff at the General Assembly's Fiscal Research Division and nonpartisan staff at the Office of State Budget and Management. As you can see, the $33.7 billion in the first year, $33.64, so a 0.2% decrease between the 2 years, because it accounts both for the economic conditions we're seeing as well as the tax cuts that were signed into law last session. The governor, as he mentioned, has recommended policy changes promoting tax fairness. So personal income tax would remain for those over $200,000 per year at 4.75%, and for those incomes below $200,000 per year would drop down eventually to the 3.99%. The governor proposes leaving the corporate tax rate at 2.5%. And the governor further recommends that the sales tax transfer, the general fund sales tax transfer that is currently at 2% to the highway fund, be maintained at the 2% level. You can see with those tax policy changes in the next line how much additional revenue they generate for the general fund. Additionally, there's some revenue that comes from PHP when you have Medicaid expansion. So that is recurring revenue. So you can see then on that bottom line the total recurring general fund revenues that this budget recommends. So where would those funds be invested? We always start with the base budget. So this is just last year's budget with non-recurring items removed. So you can see it's about $27.5 billion both years of the biennium. The governor started then with the comprehensive remedial plan. So the court has ordered that, and there's funding for years 2 and 3. We are currently in year 3 of that plan. So to make that plan whole, another $459 million is needed in the baseline. The governor's budget assumes that funding goes in before we enter year 4 of the plan next school year. You've heard the governor mention compensation, very large area of investment in this budget, $2.39 billion in the first year, nearly $2.8 billion in the second year. That includes both state employees and teachers. And then programmatic investments, things like K-12 enrollment, higher ed enrollment, further funding of K-12 education, the Medicaid rebase, justice and public safety, conservation, cybersecurity, et cetera. All of those add up to $2.69 billion in the first year and $3.4 billion in the second, to bring you to the total investments down at the bottom of a little under $33 billion in the first year and a little over $34 billion in the second. I want to stress that this budget maintains very high levels of reserve. So there's almost $6.8 billion in this budget unappropriated. So it's $4.25 billion in the savings reserve. $1 billion remains in the stabilization and inflation reserve. That's the full amount that the General Assembly put in that reserve last year. More than $500 million in the State Emergency Response and Disaster Relief Fund, and more than $700 million in the Medicaid contingency reserve, and the governor has added to that reserve in this budget to bring it to that level. So moving on to opportunities and looking specifically at education. This budget ensures a sound basic education. It fully funds years 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the comprehensive remedial plan. That is a total investment of almost $4.5 billion. It does all of that without raising taxes and keeping a balanced budget and keeping that funding in reserves. You can see the areas of the plan there. It invests in high-quality teachers. It invests in the finance system, as we call it. So those are your allotments, disadvantaged student funding, low-wealth school funding, limited English proficiency, et cetera. It provides for assistance and turnaround coaches for our public schools, and it invests heavily in early childhood learning, pre-K and early intervention. And there's also post-secondary and career alignment funding. On the next slide, you can see some of the examples. This is just illustrative of what that $4.5 billion will do, but it is a monumental shift in education. 1,000 new nurses, social workers, school counselors, school psychologists, 115 school psychologist internship positions, almost 1,700 new teaching fellows, almost 2,700 additional teaching assistants. It provides no-cost meals to almost 100,000 students. So students who are currently getting reduced lunch would receive free lunch under the comprehensive remedial plan. Provides early intervention services to more than 10,000 children and would expand pre-K, both increasing the rates to have more child care centers want to do NC pre-K, but also providing 5,000 more children with that opportunity. You heard the governor speak about teacher pay. There's $1.8 billion in this budget to recruit and retain high-quality educators. This budget would bring starting teacher salary in the second year to $46,000 a year. That moves us from 46th in the nation to 16th in starting teacher pay. We are currently near the bottom in the Southeast for teacher pay. We are second from last. It would move us second from the top for starting teacher pay. It would also bring teacher pay in line with what those college graduates are seeing in other professions. As the governor mentioned, there's minimum raise each year of 10%. It's 6% in the second year for an average raise of 18%. Restores master's pay, and it provides the $1,500 retention bonus for those making under $75K, which is most of our educators, as well as a $1,000 bonus for those making over $75,000. I would note that the state board voted unanimously a few weeks ago on a 10% teacher pay raise, and this matches that. Moving on to look at what the governor's budget does in the area of workforce and economic development. For workforce development, it's a multifaceted approach. So there's on-the-job training and credentialing taking place at community colleges, new investments of almost $40 million there. High demand and high need workforce development, more than $230 million. That's across the UNC system, as well as the community college system, as well as independent colleges. There's specific programs, they're named in your budget. A few are listed here, as well as flexible pools of funding for community college system, the UNC system, as well as the independents to allocate as needed in those high demand areas, be that allied health, computer science, construction and trade, wherever those needs are. And then there's hard to staff industry supports. So we've all heard of the difficulty faced with staffing skilled nursing facilities and personal care, as well as child care workers. So there's more than $215 million dedicated to supporting those industries and raising those pay rates. Workforce development. So as the other part of this we know, and as I mentioned before, is that we have a very tight labor market and we have folks who have not returned to the workforce. And one of the key reasons why that is because they do not have adequate child care. So this budget continues the child care stabilization grants, $500 million total over the biennium that were originally funded by the federal government. There's $100 million recurring for child care subsidy rate floor within low wealth counties, and $11 million for community colleges for their campus child care programs, many of which were shut down during the pandemic. And there's also an additional $100 million for capital cost for public schools to build NC pre-K classrooms. In the area of economic development, the governor has a $325 million reserve You can see it broken out here. Mega site development, we know that we have now too few mega sites. So many companies have come here, so this would help with developing additional mega sites. Funding for the Sports and Entertainment Fund, additional funding to Golden Leaf, funds to help develop Radio Island, as well as the other one I'll mention here is the Canton paper mill closure. So at least $5 million to Canton and the surrounding community, earmarked in this budget for that, and as well as an additional $50 million for downtown revitalization grants. Right now, we have a historic moment of federal funding opportunities. So we had the pandemic relief funds that came to the state on sort of a formulary basis, and we didn't have to apply for them. They were not all of them were competitive, most of them were not. But in recent years, we've also had the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's hundreds of billions of dollars available from the federal government. Some of it is formulary, but much of it is competitive. We need to be positioning our state to be competitive for those funds and ensure that we bring back our share of those tax dollars to our state. The governor, in recognition of that, puts $225 million additional into the federal infrastructure match reserve. We know at least $115 million right now of known state match requirements for things like clean water and drinking water, energy, and other programs, and then some additional funds for programmatic support. The state needs to be nimble and needs to be responsive as these federal funding opportunities are announced. Many of them are still being developed, but there's great potential here, and many states are looking at this, so we need to be sure we're prepared. The next area, building healthy and resilient communities. This budget assumes Medicaid expansion. As you know, expanding Medicaid is a win-win for our state. It brings health care to more than 600,000 North Carolinians who desperately need it. It helps prevent rural hospitals from closing. It helps fight the opioid epidemic. It also brings additional funding to the state. So the $1.74 billion federal bonus, we expect savings to the general fund of almost $56 million annually. It would inject $5 billion into the economy, and we also estimate that we'd have more than a $240 million boost in state and local sales taxes. The governor recognizes the difficulties facing our state, both in health and mental health. There's more than $1.5 billion in this budget designated towards mental health services. You heard of the $1 billion earmarked from the Medicaid bonus payment to create the iHope Fund. You can see where that would go, but it would assist with Medicaid reimbursement rates, community-based behavioral health treatment, to assist with integrating behavioral health, also with our justice system, and help children with behavioral health needs who are involved in the child welfare system. And finally, there's funding for telehealth in rural communities and other technology to improve health outcomes. Additional mental health items include, and you heard this mentioned before, but more than $500 million for school social workers, psychologists, nurses, and counselors, funding for the 988 line and the NC Psychiatric Access line, funding for evidence-based behavioral health supports in schools, as well as additional support for crisis units for justice-involved youth. There's also funding aimed at universities and higher ed, including the 24/7 mental health hotline and mental health first aid, as well as flexible funding for the university system to address mental health emergencies taking place there. Additional large health investments include more than $160 million for community-based services for people with disabilities. That's innovation waiver rates, innovation slots, and transitions to community living. There are statewide health investments. So there's funding set aside from the Medicaid bonus payment for rural hospital rescue fund. There's support for all the county social service offices as they wind down the public health emergency and they have to deal with removing those folks from Medicaid and assisting those folks. And there's support for older North Carolinians to stay in their homes with needed home repairs. And the final area that I'll talk with you about today is ensuring services for North Carolinians. This is the largest investment in the state workforce in more than 50 years. The governor's budget proposes a 5% cost of living increase in year 1 with a 3% in year 2. The bonus is $1,500 for those who make less than $75,000 a year, $1,000 for those who make more than $75,000 a year. That would be paid in two installments, so it would function as a retention bonus with one payment in November and the other in April. Employees who are on step plans would receive an additional 1.5%, so that's law enforcement as well as correctional officers. And as was mentioned, there's what we're calling an enhanced labor market adjustment reserve, which provides all state agencies with 3% of their total general fund payroll to allocate to their hard to staff and hard to fill positions. One item of note here is that this is not just on general fund employees. The governor has also provided sufficient funding to do it for receipt-supported employees. So you heard last year many agencies talking about how they were unable to give additional raises to those who are either operate off of receipts that come in from fees or receipts that come off of federal funds, because often they're not able to increase the amount of receipts. So this would actually cover the receipts from the general fund. Retirees would see a 2% recurring COLA with a 2% supplement additional in year 1 and a 1% supplement year 2. And it fully funds the state health plan as well as the retirement system, ADEC. Additionally, beyond pay, the governor wanted to look at employee benefits. So he proposes 2 changes to annual leave. He increases the annual leave rates, which you can see there, so that folks get more days earlier in their career. We know that the turnover rate is more than double for employees in their first year of service. He also recommends transitioning longevity pay, which has been around for almost 60 years in state government, to retention pay. So right now, if you're a state employee, once you've been here 10 years, you're rewarded with a 1.5% payment the anniversary of your, in the month of the anniversary of your employment. The governor proposes moving that sooner in one's career so that they start to receive a 1% payment at 2 years, and then it increases from there. It does not increase the maximum amount in both of these categories. Maintains the same amount of vacation days at the highest level, as well as the retention pay. Why such a historic investment? I'll just remind you of some of the challenges facing state government. Turnover rate of almost 17%, first-year employees at more than 36%, an average vacancy rate right now of 23%, which is almost double what it was before the pandemic. The average state employee salary has increased only 20% since 2010, but CPI is up almost 38%. A nationwide survey indicated that 52% of state and local government employees are considering leaving their jobs. So this is a moment in time that we have to respond to. So to conclude, this budget invests in historic opportunities. It is balanced, it does not raise taxes, and it maintains nearly $7 billion in unappropriated reserves. So with that, thank you all, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
With regard to the $5 million for the Canton Mill closure, can you explain, if I am a mill worker and I am unemployed, how I go about trying to access any of that? And could you also explain what people